Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I'm Noel, your host. I always forget who I am, but it's I should have it tattooed on me somewhere so that I don't. This week, I've got a fantastic guest, Laura Connell, who's joining us from, I believe, Canada. So we'll find out about that. Oddly enough, I'm in France, so there's a sort of language connection between us this time around. And Laura's going to be talking about her experience of learning about how to set healthy boundaries, particularly from a trauma-informed perspective, which is going to be amazing, to be honest. Really excited about that. If you've got any questions at the end of the show, do contact us. So Noel at noelmcdermott.net or WhatsApp me 07506 319 745. I'm sure Laura would be happy to sort of answer any questions, and we'll put her contact details towards the end of the show. That's enough of me. Hi, Laura. How are you doing?
Hi, Noel. I'm doing really well, thanks. Thank
You're
you for having me.
It's at the moment.
I'm in Toronto at the moment. This is my hometown, and I also reside in Florida. So I have two places, but Toronto is my hometown.
Okay. And Toronto, is it cold there? I'm asking as
it has just turned cold. So we have 4 seasons ostensibly, but really it's a 6-month winter, a 2-month summer, maybe a 6-week fall. It's very dominated by winter. So it has gotten quite cold, and the snow is going to start very, very soon. Usually anytime after Halloween, the snow will start coming down, and it won't stop until April.
All the Brits listening to this are going, yeah, I know. That's what we have. Nominally, we have 4 seasons, but mostly we have the season called wet in the UK.
Yes, I actually have quite strong ties to England because my father is from Hertfordshire. And I spent my childhood going to England annually to see my grandparents, and my sister now lives in London. So I still have very strong ties to the country.
Hertfordshire, St Albans and Hertfordshire itself and all that area.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
yeah.
There was a band in my childhood called Hatfield and the North. And obviously is in Hertfordshire as well. You may have heard of it. And there was a big sign to the motorway, what you might call a freeway. It's a sign as you enter that bit of the motorway saying Hatfield and the North. And this band went
interesting.
Motorway sign. So there you go. That age.
So they'll never forget where they're from with that name. I love that.
It's great to have you on the show, and thanks for joining us, and thanks for your flexibility today. Messing Laura around. You won't have asked her to move times, and she's very kindly and generously moved on. So you say you're a trauma-informed coach. That's on your tagline. Can you tell me what that means? Because people may not have come across those terms. And certainly in the UK, coaching tends to be thought of as more of a business thing, and people, that type of coaching, but there's a whole range of coaching approaches. So I'm just out of interest, what is a trauma-informed coach, or what would you say it is?
Sure. Well, this is a branch of life coaching. So as opposed to something like what you mentioned, executive coaching or business coaching, it's coaching about your life. And actually business can be included in that. And I do find that people who do life coaching do see improvements in their business as an offshoot. But the trauma-informed part is just acknowledging that the people that you're working with have been through trauma, and that is part of their story, and that it's going to impact how they process information. It's going to impact how they hear things like that. So life coaching itself is different than therapy because it is a co-creation, they call it. So instead of the therapist who uses a modality on you, or who uses a technique and it's more therapist led, we say coaching is client led. So the client comes in with whatever they are dealing with at the time, and in dealing with those present issues in your life, it drips out to other issues in the life. So it's that idea that how you deal with this one thing is how you deal with everything. And the trauma-informed aspect, again, is being able to notice maybe when a client is triggered, or if a client is emotionally bypassing something, or if they've gone into fight or flight, or if they've frozen, and to know what that means. It might mean they process more slowly. So instead of rushing in during a silence, you're going to let that silence be so they can kind of catch up. Things like that.
And do you train as a coach? Is that a
Yes.
certification that you've got?
Yes, I've trained as a trauma-informed coach. And it's interesting because when I first did, I have a degree from the University of Toronto where I'm from, and I did English and psychology. But later on, I trained as the coach because I'm an author and writing self-help. I wanted to have something that would give me credibility and education on the topic instead of someone saying, well, you're self-help, but you're not qualified. And so that was really my motivation.
Okay.
And then as I built my audience, people started to approach me for coaching based on the content I was putting out because it really resonated with them.
Right.
It was content on dysfunctional families and things that a lot of people don't talk about. So it gets hidden. And so people were seeing the content and thinking, I'm not alone and I want to deal with this stuff. Can you help me? And so at first I was saying to them, I'm really a writer and that's how I coach people is through my writing. But with enough emails and knowing that I could do this, I thought, let me see if I can help these people. And that's really where it started.
Okay. And was there a personal connection? I'm just wondering about your own sort of life and particularly early life experience, whether there was
Absolutely. Yeah, this all came out of my own processing. So being on the other side of healing, and a lot of therapy or coaching is an interpersonal relationship with whoever you're working with, right? And so what I find with the people I work with is that I can understand where they're coming from because I have been through it myself.
Right.
I'm just a little bit further along than them. That's all that's going on.
I like
And
that.
so growing up,
The side of healing. It's a really nice term because
right,
I find that it's actually a very hopeful term in terms of
good.
sort of other terms that people might use, like some people use the term broken or damaged or traumatized. And there's a lot of words which have sort of loaded meaning, whereas being on the other side of healing suggests to me that you're on a journey, which is how I understand it, to be honest.
I do too. And it's important to know that the journey doesn't really end. You can be further along, but I think as we go through our lives, it's the beauty of this self-discovery, and we keep learning new things about ourselves and more will be revealed because you can't read everything in a textbook. Sometimes you have to experience things in your life in order for those things to be revealed. Romantic relationships are a great example of that, an opportunity for things to come out that wouldn't otherwise come out. So yeah, healing is definitely a process. But
Yeah.
for me, I grew up in a home with, a lot of emotional abuse and neglect. And so that informed my whole life. But being a Gen X, it's not like my kids who are Gen Z, where they talk about these things very openly and they're very interested in healing journeys and so on. We tended to suppress, and it was very stigmatized to talk about feeling anxious or anything like that. So I didn't deal with it. All the self-sabotage it was creating in my adult life, I blamed on myself. And although I take responsibility for my actions, I know there was a root cause that started in childhood that needed to be dealt with.
Yeah.
So in fact, during the pandemic in 2020, that's when I started to really deal with it in a way that was more public. And that's when this work really started to take root, and it went from the personal to the more public, and leads to where I am now.
I just want to, for people who are listening, Laura and I had a brief chat, but we had a chat before the show talking about what we were going to go through. And I asked Laura if she's okay to talk about personal material. She said she was. And I made the point that The show's about looking at things where people have processed the issues. We're not about opening our guts up and spilling them. And just checked in with Laura that she felt comfortable. It's also, I want people to think about, are you comfortable listening? Because we may talk about things that are upsetting and triggering, and have a think about that, and have a think about whether you want to stop for a while, and you can come back to the show because it's a recording, and you may want to go and chat to some people, if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable with what we're talking about. The people that you trust that you can talk to. Certainly, if you're in that space in your life where these events that we may talk about are very raw for you, and you feel like doing something hurtful or damaging to yourself or to others, I would suggest stopping listening and reaching out to people, and asking for help and support. In the UK, a good place to get hold of support if you're feeling upset, maybe feeling a bit dark about things because it's bringing up triggers or memories. You can reach out to the Samaritans. In Canada, what would be the equivalent of that, Laura?
I don't know what the Samaritans are, to be honest with you.
They're a
But we
service that are free, that people, crisis counselling service that people can just call, well known in the UK and Ireland.
right.
A sort of crisis.
Yeah. So yeah, we have a number of helplines. I don't have that information at my fingertips, but I could always give it to you for the show notes if you want.
Well,
I don't want to say now because I don't have it with me.
Okay, we'll add it on at the end, so we'll get that information. So if you're watching this show, James, our techie guy, our producer, will have put that information, those links in. So check those links out, and the information underneath the video that you're watching. I always do this, Laura. I should have warned you beforehand, but when we're going to talk about potentially triggering things, I like to know that it's about being safe with information.
And I'm glad you said that, because that is a form of boundaries too.
Yeah.
Being mindful of what you take in and that you're taking care of yourself while you do that. And if you choose to do that or not.
Yeah, I mean, these days I have to say, because I come from a very highly sort of dangerous childhood, I would say, lots of violence, stuff like that, and also community violence. I come from an Irish, sort of violent Irish background with lots of drinking and things like that. I mean, in the days when the euphemistically called Troubles were still on. And so various people in various community divides. I found, I don't know if you found this, but I found that I had until I got help and sort of moved beyond this stuff, I found that I was always watching this stuff when it came up, whatever. And so, like, I'm just thinking about, as we place ourselves historically with what's going on in Gaza and Israel at the moment. Now, historically, that would have really triggered me from my own background of communal violence, intercommunal violence, which is what I come from.
Yeah, and the tribal type of violence.
All of that. Yeah, absolutely. And
there's definitely a heaviness, I feel, over that's almost global about this issue.
Yeah, and also I think we live in a world now, you've mentioned the pandemic, and then we had Ukraine, and in the UK, cost of living crisis, I presume you had it. So there have been a number. Now we have the reopening of those wounds again, the active phase of a war in Israel and in Gaza. And so there have been, I think, a number of shocks, existential shocks to our psyche, our collective human psyche, and significant ones, I would say, which again is all is activating for those people who haven't had the opportunity to move beyond their trauma into the healing stage. And so again, I think it's useful to note the context, because I think of trauma, I'm going to come back to you, but I think of trauma as something that exists in a multi-level, multimodal is the term that's used, in a multimodal expression. And it's not just individual body that holds it. It's often held within communities. It's often held within political structures and community structures, and all of these levels of meaning and association exist. And there are often very specific gendered forms of trauma and violence. So women will experience things that I'm not likely to experience, etc. And I think all of those levels of meaning are there and apparent. So I just want to recognize that for people. And we live in times that are frightening.
Yeah, and when you talk about the social aspect as well, I really think about family dynamics. So even a scapegoat in a family can also exist in a corporation. You know, we see the scapegoat is the one who's kind of the whistleblower in the family. They want to reveal the truth about things and they get punished for that.
Yeah.
And that same role exists in the family of a business, right? Where somebody wants to reveal some corruption and they get severely punished for that. And the punishments can be very dire, even your life or at least your livelihood, you know. So there's something deeply psychological going on both in the personal and the political landscape, and they often mirror each other.
Are you okay to talk about your personal life experience a bit more? Because I find that...
Yes, I definitely do. If anything, I might talk too much, so you can reel me in if I do.
Talking too much about this stuff, no such thing. But so when you say that you were brought up in a difficult childhood, do you mind talking about that a little bit and sort of just explaining to us what it was like?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I was born in 1971. So like I said, a Gen X, and I was born in Toronto. Both my parents are immigrants. Like I said, my father's from England, my mother is from Trinidad. And my mother had some sort of undiagnosed mental illness. So at the time, they diagnosed her as having depression. And I think in the 70s, that was the only language they had. It was something else. There were deeply narcissistic qualities. There was some evidence of manic depression, you know, that sort of the acting manically and then being depressed after. So there was more going on, but without a diagnosis, it's not up to me to say. But what it came down to as a child with a mother like this is that my needs were not attended to. So I was very parentified because my mother needed me to manage her emotions because she was so emotionally dysregulated. And this, of course, came out of...
Sorry to interrupt, but just for people in the UK may not understand that term, parentified. We young carer in the UK, so that the child has to care for the adult rather than the other way around. That's what you're saying?
It is, and it's a little confusing sometimes because you might say, well, I didn't have to cook dinner, I didn't have to physically care for my parent, but it can also be an emotional thing where your emotional needs are not taken care of, but you are tasked instead with minding your parents' emotional needs. So with someone who's narcissistic, it could be tiptoeing so they don't rage. You know, it could be that their anger was allowed, but you weren't allowed to express anything. That can also be parentification. Other ways I was parentified is that I had a sister who came 2.5 years after me, and I had to take care of her. So quite literally on the weekends, my parents would drink a lot. They wouldn't get out of bed. And so I would have to get in the crib with my sister and take care of her until they decided to emerge, that sort of thing. And so I think about that child, and I think even the needs of hunger, because I'm sure I wanted breakfast, but that was suppressed. So all the needs, you don't think as a child, oh, I need this, I'm not getting this. You just suppress it in order to get on. And that carries on into adulthood. And then with my father, he was very emotionally, what they say, neglectful now. So emotional neglect is just not noticing the child, not attending to their needs, really only noticing me to criticize me, things like that. I can remember an incident, and it sounds so innocuous, but it really affects you as a child. And having an English father, I learned how to make tea very early. And so I was making tea for 3 people and I used 3 tea bags. And I was like 5 years old. I didn't know these are 2-cup tea bags, you know. And my father yelled at me for using 3 tea bags for 3 cups. And I literally didn't know what I did wrong. So there was a sense with my father that he didn't teach me anything, but when I made a mistake, he would call me stupid and yell at me and things like that. So that was a lot of the climate in my household, and it led to a lot of me feeling very alone, feeling I had to fend for myself. And it also led to me feeling like no one was on my side. And it affected the way I operated in the world because I made my world very small, because everything became about staying safe because nobody had my back, was the way I viewed it. And so even though I did very well at school, I would deny myself opportunities. So for instance, a teacher would say, you gave a really good speech. We want you to go to the regional and compete with this speech on behalf of the school. And I said, no, I'm not doing that because that is an opportunity to look stupid and I'm not putting myself in that position.
Sure.
And I remember feeling no regret over giving up these opportunities, just feeling kind of like, I kept myself safe. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so you take this into adulthood, into the workplace, staying small, not wanting to be noticed because being visible is very frightening and scary and really had negative consequences. So it follows you around.
Fantastic description. I'm going to add in a bit of stuff, if you don't mind, from my own sort of professional back insights.
Yeah.
One of the things I would say is that you still have a little bit of habit of reducing the awfulness of what happened to you. It sounds really horrible, Laura. It's really, really horrible. And you still use some of those terms to try and sort of minimize the sort of the failure of your parents. And I come from a perspective, I know my parents did the best that they could, but they were pretty shit, to be honest. Their best was nowhere near good enough. They were the best. I don't blame them for anything. And, you know, like I say, my family come from intercommunal violence, and my mum was brought up by a guy who was head of part of the IRA, and he was a dreadful guy. I mean, literally a terrorist. So can imagine what he was like as a father. Not great. So there's no sense in which I'm carrying baggage about that stuff, but I do recognize that you were brought up in a way that was less than optimal, much less than optimal. And I want to describe to people what I've heard. So what you're describing is a child that doesn't feel securely attached to loving people, loving parents, or loving adults in charge who are consistent, kind, and available, and you didn't form those stable, loving attachments. Now, I want to give people a little example of what that looks like, because you described it perfectly, what happens, really. This fear of doing anything, just in case, right? So there's a thing called a stranger situation, which you probably know from child development. And you have a toddler with a parent that they're healthily and lovingly attached to, and the parent and the toddler are in a room and they're playing away. You let the toddler play with toys and stuff like that. They happily play. And then a stranger walks into the room and the toddler becomes a bit anxious. And what they do is they go and physically touch the parent that they're securely attached to, or they may climb up on their lap. But they do that very briefly just to reassure themselves. And then they start to explore this stranger. And that's what secure attachments give us, is the capacity to the courage to explore the world and strange situations. And that capacity to explore the world and strange and new situations is a fundamental human skill. It's one of the reasons we dominate the planet. It's because we can explore new stuff. Anybody ever watch Star Trek? Explore new worlds, new places. It's a fundamental part of the human psyche that we do this. But that capacity to explore comes from a sense of security inside. And that sense of security inside comes from these early maturational experiences with our parents. And if that's disruptive, that can potentially be devastating. Absolutely devastating. So that lack of safety is crucial. I mean, I know what you're saying. There's something about we expecting abuse there to be something that happened that you can point to. Often it's more difficult for people to understand the failure of parenting when there wasn't something you can obviously point to. There was just an absence of something. The absence of safety is one of those things. I didn't feel safe at home. I didn't feel valued at home. I didn't feel important. I didn't feel like my existence was good enough in its own right. It's devastating not to have those things. And I think you beautifully described it, Laura. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Sorry
Thank
to.
you. Yeah, and the attachment styles that you're describing, I definitely had the disorganized or the fearful avoidant, as they call it, which is just makes you feel like there's danger everywhere.
Right? Yeah. And it's also it's a strange one, particularly when there's a potential threat. Is that frozen stuff that can happen for children, because you depend on these people at that age, so you have to go towards them for stuff, but they're an object of fear, so you have to get away from them as well.
It really leads to, in your adult relationships, that come here, go away, that craving for intimacy, but the fear of it at the same time.
Absolutely. Really sort of, and I think you've described it beautifully. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to.
No, it's great.
Add into the narrative. It's a very common thing that we see, sort of clinically. So these are your early experiences and some of your formative school experiences. Did you have that experience as well, that school was also a bit reparative or not? Because sometimes it can be reparative. Damage.
Yes, up to a certain point. So because I went to the same school until what we call grade 6, so I don't know what you call it in England, it's age 11.
Yeah.
So from age 5 to age 11, I went to the same school. So I really felt that was my home away from home. And because I was academically gifted, so I skipped a grade, and I was sort of almost like a star at school to my teachers. I excelled in all my subjects, so I could go to school and feel very valued and well loved by my teachers. I always stayed after school to do the chalkboard, to what do you call it, clap the chalkboard brushes and things like that. And then we moved in grade 7 or age 12, and things changed, and I no longer felt at home just because people didn't know me. I didn't have that reputation. I didn't feel safe, all of that stuff. And my grades declined. Like, I was a straight A student and they went sharply down. And it continued like that for a few years. And then it wasn't until I was in secondary school, high school, and we're talking age 14 and up at this point, still not doing very well, still not living up to my potential. But it was at the very end of high school, I set a goal for myself that I was going to go to the University of Toronto, which is the most esteemed university in the city, maybe even the country. And I just put my eyes on that, and something inside me told me that's where I'm going to go.
Right.
And so at the end of my high school career, I set my sights there, and it was an English teacher who said to me, "Where do you want to go to university?" And I said, "I want to go to U of T, which is University of Toronto." And she looked at me and she said, "If you keep going the way you're going, you're not going to get there." And that, believe it or not, was a very loving thing for me to hear. And because I had so little attention, that even someone just telling me straight up something like that, that doesn't sound very loving, meant a lot to me. And it actually changed everything. And I just went right back to getting my straight A's, got into the school, and that was a really positive thing in my life.
Identify with that statement, because what it seems to me is the teacher thought you were important enough to be honest with, and give us
Exactly.
that. I understand that. I mean, as a child, one of my fantasies, one of the things I acted out on was camouflage. I was fascinated by camouflage because I literally wanted to be invisible so I'd feel safe. If I could have been invisible, that would have been great. And also the same for me. I was gifted academically. And so I did great at school. And I was lucky both my schools. So the first one I got well known, and I was a star without a doubt. I was a star pupil. I also did every single after school activity. And looking back on that, I know that was because I didn't want to go home.
Yeah.
Was it? Home was not a nice place. So there was no way I wanted to be there. School was organized, it was structured, it was all the things that my home life wasn't. It was predictable. I knew if I did this, I got a clap. If I did this, I got told off. I knew the rules. And I was a goody two shoes at school, without a doubt, because the worst thing to me would have been to be thrown out of school because that meant
Right.
home. That was the last thing I wanted. So I get all of that. I really do identify with it. And maybe other people are identifying with it. Equally, kids who are in a tough home situation can act out in other ways. So we acted in, I would say, as much as possible. We tried to hide things, be invisible, be good, meet adult needs, whether they were teachers or parents, you get good grades and all that stuff because our teachers wanted us to, not because there's intrinsic worth, but that's okay. And then other kids act out. They use substances, they hurt themselves, they're overly sexual, hypersexual, they are risk takers, etc. They become the classic, if you like, scapegoat children.
Yeah.
You and I took
I would say
child, right? Which comes with its own problems, but these dysfunctional.
And before that teacher talked to me, just that once, I was going into the scapegoat role. I was doing the drinking and the grades were not there and all of that stuff. So she really whipped me into shape just with a little bit of attention,
It's fascinating, isn't it, that we inhabit those roles? And it's like you've got the golden child and you've got the scapegoat child, and you were both, which is interesting because people talk about these roles as though they're naturally ascribed. It's natural to that individual, but you were both. And really shows the lie, doesn't it? That these are roles ascribed and given to people, and people are molded into those roles by the responses of people around them.
Yeah, and I think because we're human beings, we can't just have these very strict categories. And I would say I did move in and out of those roles. So I don't think I held them at the same time, but I did move in and out in very short periods of time during my childhood, I would say.
Right. Okay. Did you have siblings, or were you just you had one sibling, didn't you? A younger.
I did. Yes. Yeah. My younger. Yes. Who I was very responsible for.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very familiar story. Thank you for sharing it. So you turn yourself around at school, you become more successful because you have that capacity, you get the grades, and you go to university and study English and psychology. Was there a reason for those choices?
English would be, well, all the choices I made were writing was my primary talent. I always knew I could write. That was something I was confident about. And so I just pursued that because I was good at it. And then psychology is the human behavior. I was always very interested in that. And so I did end up pursuing writing. But then I got into a marriage with someone who had his own dysfunctional family and was very much like my father. And then things started to go bad again. So again, we see my life kind of going up and down like this and having some hope and then having something come in that brings it down. So yeah, I married someone who was very bad for me. I stayed with him for a long time. We had 2 children together, but during that time with him, things were not good for me. Not authentic at all.
Story, isn't it? Very familiar that we repeat. If we don't process, if we don't understand, if we don't get insight, if we don't heal, we repeat the wounding experiences.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is, before we married, I kept trying to end it. Something in me knew this person wasn't good for me, but I don't know if it's the familiarity of being treated poorly or not having anyone to really support me or what it was, but he would kind of just reel me back in and I would go. And eventually I got the proposal and I said yes. And that, cemented everything, but not a good partner for me.
No.
For his own reasons and for my reasons at the time too. I wasn't healed at the time either.
And
So just
the way,
not a good match.
there's lots of ways to think about it. But again, if we think about attachment, it makes absolute sense, don't we? You're just repeating exactly the same attachment patterns as a child.
Yeah.
And you're operating
So he was the
perspective as well.
and he was the avoidant, which my father very much was as well. And I was in my disorganized, fearful avoidant phase. So we had those. Very difficult to have a healthy relationship when you're dealing with those two attachment styles.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But you had some children from it. So again, there's a mixture of good and bad. And this is the story of life, isn't it? It's not.
It is.
It's not that simple. So you're actually in some senses a functional relationship, if not emotionally. You're going through the motions of having a marriage and producing and so on. And you've got 2 children, did you say?
I do. And they're now, one has just graduated from university and she's getting into her work life now. And the other one is halfway through a journalism degree. She's in her 3rd year.
So they're very sort of inspired by their mum who's come to terms with their own past and understands herself.
I hope so. And they were an inspiration to me to do the work as well for their sake, a lot of it.
It's interesting that because, the patterns of intergenerational failure are usually upheld by a fear of opening up a can of worms, aren't they? That sometimes I think, and particularly our generation, because I'm 1967, so a little bit older than you, but similar same generation. And our generation definitely were told that you don't talk about these things because it's bad. Something bad will happen if you talk about it. And so all the stuff that happened in my household, nobody knew.
Yeah.
We were told you don't talk about it. Whereas I'd be horrified now if my own child didn't talk about things. Absolutely.
And we were very shamed if we talked about it.
Yeah.
And there was that societal level as well that supported hiding these things because you were considered very moany or very weak if you wanted to talk about these things. That really just wasn't done at all.
Yeah. And then still you hear from, we call them gammon steaks here in the UK. These older men who look a bit like me because they're about my age, who get angry about the snowflake generation and kids these days are too soft. And I'm like, mate, if I'm hard, then I prefer soft all the time. If what I went through is go through to be hard, I don't want anybody to go through what I went through, least of all my own. It's a very strange attitude to have, I think. But when you were you worried when you started to process some of this stuff that you were going to hurt your own children with it, or in some?
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why I waited to be so public about my story until my kids were 18, because I didn't want to embarrass them in any way. So I really did wait until they were both 18 before I made it very public. And I didn't have a fear so much of opening a can of worms because I've always believed that the truth will set you free, and I've always wanted to get to the bottom of things. What I feared more was retaliation from family members, because I had in fact had that from my mother because of her emotional instability. She would even troll me online and leave comments on my blog against me. And because she didn't know, I think she thought it was anonymous, and it wasn't. I can see who leaves it. I can see their email, right? And so she would leave comments, just being mean to me, basically. And in fact, other people in the comments would rush in to defend me, not even knowing this was my mother. Like, it was all very sad. So I feared that retaliation of family members just that danger again, that fear of, if I am myself, I'm going to get in trouble. That was still with me. And I even entertained the idea of having a pseudonym when I first started writing online about this stuff, because I had written about these things in a more general sense, but writing about my own family dysfunction was quite a new thing, to be really open about it and not keep hiding things for the sake of other people or for the fear of getting in trouble. So once I started to do that and see that actually there is no retaliation, and yes, they are going to talk about me, but that's none of my business. And the support that it's giving other people is much more important. And that's the part I didn't expect. That's more important than the little talking behind my back that might be going on. Like, I'm safe, basically.
Yeah, and I would say to people that it is important to do a risk assessment, because you did one.
Yes.
You looked at what are the
Yes.
consequences, what's actually going to happen, because other people may be in circumstances where the consequences would be more dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. You're totally right. And I do tell people that too. And
Yeah.
those are the words I use too, is what is the risk to you and can you withstand it?
Yeah, there's no, and again, for people listening, this isn't a prescriptive story. This is a story. It's an experience.
Mhm.
There are so many journeys and so many pathways into and through healing. And it's really important to sort of, when you're listening to these stories, to think, well, that bit works for me and that bit doesn't.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
find a recovery, they say, in recovery circles and recovery from addiction and stuff like that. They talk about this word recovery, which means living your life in a healthier way. It's
Yes.
more complex than that. But they also talk about you need to wear your recovery like a very comfortable set of clothes that really fit you.
Yeah, it's individual.
Yeah. You don't take it off tailor it to your own body and your own life. And of course, your own body changes, your own life changes. And so you need to keep tailoring it and keep changing it. Why this conversation is giving me such a dry throat?
I wonder if it's the change in season.
Maybe. But there you go, dry throat dealt with. I've got enough water. Again, really sort of lots of identification on my part in terms of that. And I've only been more open about this stuff since my father died and he was one of the abusers. More not because I was afraid he was going to do something, but I made a personal choice that while he was alive, I wasn't going to put him in that position potentially because I have some profile. That was my decision about my behavior. And people need to make their own decisions about their behavior, about what they want to do. So shame is very important, I think, in all of this. Now, shame is I want to say to people, shame is a normal and natural and healthy emotion. And shame is closely linked to a thing called disgust, which is a visceral gut response. And disgust and shame are there to help human beings not be really horrible to each other. That's the function, right? So you'd feel disgust and shame if you really hurt somebody, to torture them or kill them or et cetera, et cetera. And you should feel that. And people who don't feel shame are very, very, very frightening people. You know, they are very disordered. People who do not have those disgust responses and those shame responses for doing awful things are very frightening.
Would that be psychopathy?
Yeah, you know, there are many examples of dangerous people in public life. Donald Trump is one of them. Very dangerous person, very deranged thinking, seems to have no shame whatsoever. Doesn't matter how much damage they cause. And again, that's part of a risk assessment. And you were talking about, somebody that, your mum being close, more on the narcissistic part of the scale.
Right.
Again, that's part of it. You'll get anger responses from narcissists. It's a classic thing. They will attack.
Yeah.
They won't develop right.
And the inability to feel empathy or compassion for another.
Yeah.
It's this view that they can only see their own suffering. They can't see the suffering of others. It's just a limitation that they have.
So coming back to shame, though, shame is a really important human response, but it can be hijacked and manipulated in ways that it wasn't designed to do, which you began to allude to. And so shame can be used to silence inappropriately because it's such a horrible feeling. And shame is attached to social control mechanisms or family control mechanisms and control mechanisms in general. It can be incredibly destructive. You're nodding away there that you have that's the sort of thing that happened to you.
It reminds me of something a client said to me, because a lot of my clients are considering no contact or limited contact with very difficult family members, very dysfunctional relationships that they've tried very hard to make functional and they simply can't. So they're considering changing the nature of it by having less contact or even no contact. And more than one of them have said to me, I don't want to be the kind of person that doesn't talk to my mother. And what I noticed there was judgment for sure, and the distancing language of looking at yourself from the outside as that kind of person.
Sure.
And who told you that it's a certain type of person who doesn't talk to their mother and you don't want to be in that class? This is all shame that's coming from external sources. These are just the voices of society. And I've even heard quote unquote dating coaches say it's a real red flag if someone doesn't get along with their family, you know, so there's more of that shame. And these are the external voices that maybe you haven't even heard them say the words, but you just get this sense from the culture that this is not something you want to be identified as. So that can be the unhealthy shame. You know, you were talking about healthy shame and what it's really designed to do. But when you grow up in a home like this, where you've been just made to feel bad or blamed for everything, you feel shame about almost anything. Almost anytime you're not pleasing someone else, you feel shame. And so that's unhealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and people should be aware of that, and so I guess the reason I'm talking about it is because the type of change that you've been through, Laura, involves pain. You had to work hard to get where you are right now, and although you're calm about this, I'm sure there were moments when it did not feel calm at all when you were doing your personal work and working through these things. Are you okay to talk about what got you to this point, if you like?
Yeah, I think the most painful thing is you have to be willing to be alone in a sense, but not alone in the sense of when you were a child and nobody was there for you. It's not that. It's a being there for yourself. It's the admission that actually what I need, I'm not going to get from other people right now. I need to give it to myself. And so often in a dysfunctional family, we keep going back to those same people who have proven to us that they cannot give us what we need for whatever reason. But we keep hoping that if we do it right, if we make them understand, if we say it the right way, they will give us what we need. And they're just not capable of doing that. So one of the hardest things to do, but what I believe is really the turning point in a healing journey, is simply accepting that those people are not going to give you what you need. And you must give up the hope that they will change. And if they ever do change, it is not going to be because of anything that you did. And I think a lot of people who are interested in healing, they tend to project their own desire to heal onto other people. So they assume that other people, if only they knew the truth, if only they knew what I knew, then they would want to heal. But the sad truth is, or the hard truth is, that often dysfunctional families are very invested in not healing. They're very invested in hiding the truth and in making you the bad guy if you do seek the truth. So being a truth teller in our culture, and again, if you look at the larger society, as you mentioned, being a truth teller is often a lonely experience. So I think being willing to know that, you know, for a period, I might feel like I'm the only one that has my back until I start inviting the right people into my life. And you can temper that with groups that can help you, like the recovery groups that you mentioned, or other support groups of people who are going through what you're going through. but just not trying to get what you can't get from people who can't give it to you. That, to me, admitting that is a real turning point.
Yeah. And I think also that idea of finding substitutes is a really practical thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Find father figures, you can find mother figures, you can find sister figures, etc. You can make conscious choices. I'm going to do this. And some of the sort of support groups I've mentioned, and a lot of support groups will allow you to do that and will allow you to identify what the deficits are and what you want to work on. Because this is one of the surprising things, I think, for people coming out of abuse, is that this stuff is known. Sort of because of that investment in darkness when you're in it, it's quite a surprise when you come out of it, I think, for a lot of people. And they go, oh, a lot of people have had this experience. I hadn't realized that. I thought I was the only one, but actually you're not.
Yeah.
You know,
you're not. It doesn't matter how unique you think your experience is. All you have to do is Google it to know that you're not alone. There is always other people, and often millions of people, going through what you're going through. And that's one of the pillars of self-compassion, which is something I love, is the knowledge that you are not alone, that you are not alone just in the fact that you're suffering, because all human beings suffer, but you're not alone even in this specific thing that you're going through.
I've not yet come across somebody who's had such a unique experience that nobody else had it, apart from a couple of people who were deliberately tortured by regimes, but that's a different story. Very different story. In general, I would say that most people, when an individual experiences something, they can be pretty sure another human being has experienced it somewhere else as well. Almost literally exactly the same thing. But there is that thing, I think, which is really important. And people call it the courage to heal, don't they? But there comes a point at which you have to be willing to face yourself honestly, and that takes a lot of courage, I think. Was there a specific point for you, or was it a process over time?
I think it was the point when I decided to be public about my family dysfunction.
Yeah.
And I think it was when I decided to really accept that there's nothing I can do to make these people understand. When I say these people, I mean my caregivers, like my parents and my immediate family members, that I have to let go of the idea, first of all, that what they say about me is in any way accurate or that it matters, because it doesn't. And also to know that it doesn't matter what I do, they are always going to view me as broken or the disruptive one or whatever it is. And if that ever changes, it's not going to be because of something that I did. That is kind of a hopeless cause. And I don't want to put my energy there. I want to put my energy where it's going to have a positive effect. And that's in my own healing. And in healing myself, I'm being public with it, and other people are getting helped at the same time. So that's good energy. That's a good use of energy.
And you said there was a sort of nodal point around about the time of the pandemic as well, being at home, sort of spurred you on to be more open about this.
Yes, because I was writing a blog, and at the time, this blog was doing quite well, and it still is. It gets about 15 to 20,000 visitors a month. And I was writing on things that I did care about, but that were very surface level. I would say vanilla in a way, like minimalism and just having a good life, like having an intentional life, and hygge, which is like that. I don't know what country it's from, but I think it's Norwegian, and it's just having a simple, cozy life and things like that, which I do value, but didn't tell the whole story. And so during the pandemic, I had this opportunity where I actually asked to be let go by the company I was working for, which was a corporation, didn't have a lot to do with my passions, although it was real estate, and I do enjoy real estate, but nothing to do with mental health or anything. And I asked them to let me go so I could receive unemployment, which I had never done before. I don't know if you guys call it unemployment when you're not working and you get something from the government. That's like a portion of your wages.
Okay, but
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was allowed to collect that, and I didn't feel guilty about that because I've been paying into it since I was 16 and never used it. So I used that to begin to pursue this blogging in a way that was meaningful to me, and starting to write a book and starting to put this stuff out there in a way that would allow me to have an authentic life, a truly authentic life.
Yeah.
So just something about being at home because of the pandemic, having all this time to self-reflect and kind of ask myself, what's the second half of my life going to look like? Granted, I'm not in a fake marriage anymore, but at the same time, I'm not being fully authentic. I'm kind of being surface still, and I want to go deep. And that's when I decided to do that. So 2020 was a big year for me for that.
Had you trained by then, or did that come later?
That came in 2021. So I had already got my university degree, but I went on to do the coach training in 2021.
I'm really pleased that you did. And
Thank
then
you.
it's a training. And do you do now? You obviously continue your writing because that's why you're here, and we'll talk about the book soon. But do you offer life coaching? Is that one of the things that you started doing once you got that, or was it?
That is the bulk of what I do right now.
Okay.
And I do private coaching with individual clients. And I don't want to start talking about what I offer unless you're ready for me to do that. So,
Yeah, we will at the
but that is the bulk of what I do.
story,
Yeah.
really. So that you then started a practice, as it were, as a life coach.
Yes.
One life coach. Okay, great.
And again, that started organically in a really beautiful way. I really don't promote very much. People come to me, and that just gives me the beautiful feeling like this is what I'm meant to be doing, because people are coming to me for this, and it feels really aligned, if that makes sense.
And are you specifically, because of your passion and interest, specifically bringing in people who've had maybe trauma experiences or early childhood experience, what we call adverse childhood experiences, high ACEs?
Absolutely. They all have that. Most of them are coming from dysfunctional family backgrounds, most with the scapegoat kind of role. And all of them have already done some form of therapy. So I don't make it a requirement, but I think I might, that you've done already some form of therapy, because coaching is not therapy.
Oh.
Coaching is different than therapy, and it helps to already have that background of therapy. And for some people, the therapy wasn't complete for them. Like, it got them to a certain point, and then the coaching kind of brings them across the line. For others, I think the therapy maybe wasn't the right form of therapy. There are certain types that are different than others, and some are more trauma informed than others. And so there's a variety of things, but everyone who comes to me has some experience with therapy already.
He wasn't very good at the job as well. That's more than possible.
Yeah. See? Yeah. And the interpersonal has to be there too.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the quality control can be pretty poor at times. So it just on a sort of for me, because I'm an ethical practitioner, and so are you, you're obviously clear that there are limits to what you do. I presume that would include people have severe comorbidities with severe and enduring psychiatric issues, and or high risk of suicidal ideation, etc. You would be
I don't work with people like that. I always have a call with people before we start working together, and I make sure it's a good fit. And I have referred out for things that they can do that I'm not qualified to do, such as an IFS practitioner. So I have one of my clients who has booked with a trained IFS practitioner, because I understand the principles of IFS and I can do a little bit with that, but I can't do the full meditation, and I'm just not trained to do that. So I would refer out for something like that. That's very complementary to what we're doing.
Is that the IFS you mean, or is it another one?
Internal family systems.
Right. Okay. Just making sure whenever I hear people using sort of acronyms, I want to make sure we're on the same, using the same words to mean the same thing. So IFS, internal family systems, for people that don't know. Okay, so now we are actually drawing a close. I told you the hour would go really quickly. It always does. And so it's really, yes, I want to now know what you're doing now. So you've just written a book, is that right? And had it published? Because that's how I know,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
one of your PR companies sent me an email, and I thought that's really interesting. So they're doing a good
I'm
job.
glad they did.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm glad they connected us.
what's the book? Tell us about that.
Sure. The book is called It's Not Your Fault. And the tagline is The Subconscious Reasons We Self-Sabotage and How to Stop. And this was my response to other books on self-sabotage I'd seen out there that didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
And I found that they were either very tough love, so lacking in compassion to my mind, or they were too clinical. You know, they were written by clinical psychologists who were coming from their patient experiences rather than their own experiences.
Oh.
So mine is a combination of my own experiences and a lot of research. I do a lot of research, so you can know that anything I claim in this book is backed up by something, and we have all the end notes, so you can know that this is good stuff that you can trust. And I talk about how childhood trauma creates adult self-sabotage and how you can deal with that.
Yeah. And it's such an obvious one-to-one relationship. I cannot tell you how strong the link is. That unprocessed childhood trauma will lead to repetition throughout your life. Exactly the same thing. You will recreate exactly the same scenario. And it's, you know, it's absolutely 100% clear. Very little of me believes anything that Freud said, but it's one of the truths of life is that stuff about childhood is absolutely 100%. So whatever you do, folks, process that stuff. You are not doomed to repeat unless you don't know. Sort of lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing that I learned is that it is a way of protecting yourself, believe it or not. All this self-sabotage are protective coping mechanisms that your child developed that are no longer working. They worked a little bit in childhood to keep you safe, but they're not working in adulthood at all. They were holding you back from everything you want.
And you gave a beautiful example of it in terms of your school experience, that you wouldn't go on to that event that the school thought you could shine in, because you had to sabotage that because it wasn't safe. And it is all about getting to a safe place inside. When we're in that safe place inside, we can let go of those unhelpful coping mechanisms. We all need coping mechanisms, but some are, we want mechanisms that adapt and grow, because hopefully our life is adapting and growing. So like things that were useful when I was 5 shouldn't really be useful when I'm 55. That doesn't make any sense logically, you know. It just doesn't. If you think about terms, you understand the insanity of that. But people are doing that. It needs to stop. Where can people get hold of the book if they want to read it?
Sure, you can go to my website, laurakconnell.com/book. And this is where you can find a way to get a free gift when you buy the book. So the link on that page is going to take you to the Simon & Schuster website, where you can purchase it at a number of different booksellers. And then send me an email of your purchase, and I will give you $100 worth of course material online, so you can have it anywhere in the world.
You heard it here, folks. That sounds like really good. So you do online courses for people? It's very much what
I do, yes.
coaches do this. So and again, they can be accessed via your website.
Yep, laurakconnell.com/book.
Right. I love I mean, that's one of the things I think is great about our field now, the broad field, is that there are many of these resources can be downloaded and used at your own convenience. And I think that's brilliant. You know, we need more and more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is too the beauty of being able to use Zoom, the fact that I can speak to you across the Atlantic
Yeah.
And then I can service clients in sessions that I've had clients in Australia. I've had
Sure.
clients in New Zealand. This is as far away as you can imagine, but we can still meet and discuss these things. So it is a real blessing.
Well, my experience, I don't know about yours, but my experience of the pandemic, one of the benefits for me was that I just shifted everything online. I stopped even trying to sort of to maintain an office, and it's liberated me. Like, I'm in France with my son at the moment. He lives here. My base is in London. I can do this from France. I can meet fascinating people like yourself, offer these amazing services to the public, and have total freedom in these things because of all of this stuff. So you're offer courses. You've got some written materials, books that people can read. You offer one-to-one sessions on Zoom. Yeah.
I do. I'm full right now, but the waiting list opens up quickly because we normally do 3-month sessions. So if you're interested, you can still contact me. And I'm developing a group coaching that I'm hoping to launch next month to help people through the holiday season.
Brilliant. And do you do corporate stuff as well, or is it you haven't gone into that?
Not now. I don't know what my future will look like, but I don't right now. No.
So that's fantastic stuff. Unfortunately, we have come to the end, and I told you it'd come really quickly. It's been a real pleasure to catch up with you, Laura. There's so many points of identification that I have with your story and my own personal journey as well. And I'm sure that people listening will get that as well. And the interesting thing, I think, all of this is that this notion that we can progress through life doesn't matter what's happened to us in many ways. It is possible to find a way of kickstarting our development, kickstarting our life, and getting back on track with growth and development, and sort of growing to be the true, authentic, free being that we came into this world to be. That's always available.
Absolutely. And always, it's never too late. That's what I always say. Most of my clients are over 45. And even if you're over 60 or over 70, you still have a lot of life to live, and you deserve to have the life that is real and authentic to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, lovely to have met you. Going to finish there for today, folks. So do check out the links, etc., that James will have put underneath the video. Check out the phone number for Samaritans. Check out the links that Laura will have sent about crisis helplines in Canada, etc. The most important sort of life skill in terms of healing and moving into healing is what I call help-seeking behavior. Learn to ask for help. It's the fundamental in all of this. And never give up till you get the help that works. Just keep asking, keep finding it. You're really going to be fine. Help-seeking behavior. Just get that in your pocket, in your kit bag, whatever, and keep using it. So bye-bye for now. Laura, lovely to see you. Say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Great.